Hello and welcome to this show and the 10th annual Montreal Comic Arts Festival, or Festival de la Bande Dessinée de Montréal. I am your host for this panel. My name's Elisa Favreau, and I am a writer based in Montreal. You've tuned in for the Monster Love panel, and I'm so excited to be hosting it. I'd like to start by thanking our sponsor for the show, Pro Chile. And I also would like to just take a minute, since the festival and I are both located in Montreal, to acknowledge that it is also called Jojage. It is the unceded territory of the Ganyangahaga, and for thousands of years, it's been a meeting place for lots of different First Nations to come and share their stories. And since comics and this panel are all about sharing of different stories, I invite you all to look for stories that are different than your own. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests. First up, we have Sarah Andersen, who is a cartoonist and illustrator. She graduated from the Maryland Institute of College of Art in 2014 and currently lives in NYC. She's the author of Sarah Scribbles and Fangs. She likes coffee, cats, and covens. Next up, we have Elisa Echeverría Parra, who is a visual artist whose work focuses on illustration and graphic narrative. She's the author of the autobiographical comic Anomalia and the co-author of the historical graphic novel Lota 1960. I don't know how to say the numbers in Spanish. La Huelga Larga del Carbón. She is also the creator of the webcomic The Count Dracula Enigma, an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Ines Estrada is a cartoonist from Mexico City. Her sci-fi graphic novel, Alienation, about a future of climate change and virtual reality, was published by Fantagraphics in 2019. She runs an online shop named Gatosorio, where she sells her self-published comics and also distributes work from Mexican artists. And last, we have Erik Evensen, who is a graphic designer, illustrator, and educator whose creative work often reinterprets topics from history, mythology, and folklore. His work includes Gods of Asgard, The Beast of Wolf's Bay, and anthology stories in Ghostbusters and Back to the Future. He's also an associate professor and director of the MFA in design at the University of Wisconsin-Stout. So thank you so much for joining me. I think it's going to be a really great, diverse conversation. And so to start us off, can you maybe each talk about how you incorporate monsters in your work? Maybe if Sarah, you could start us off.
Sure. So for me, monsters are like this perfect metaphor where I can put my own thoughts and feelings and desires onto. And as someone that does comics, it's just a great visual storytelling device to be able to talk about things that are other or a bit more taboo.
And Elisa, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Well, like you said, when you introduced me, I have a webcomic of it's an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's like the most direct connection I have with monsters. But I also like to draw a lot of anthropomorphic creatures that have natural elements in them. And I like to draw them not too pretty, like more like monsters, because I think that's closer to nature's wildness. Like it helps me represent nature's wildness better. That's it.
Ines, do you want to go next?
Yeah. I don't know if I really think about monsters like monsters, but I draw a lot of animals and think there's something maybe monstrous about that, and I think humans are actually more monstrous than monsters themselves or than animals. So I do like to explore the dark side of humans. And yeah, I think monsters aren't always like literal monsters.
How about you, Erik?
Yeah. So my work kind of started with Gods of Asgard, the 2007 graphic novel, and that was my first major project, really, of my own. And so I'd not really ever written much of anything before. And so working on that project, I was essentially adapting, and so I was sort of thrust into it, pulling in mythology and folklore into this project because that's what I was working with. And so when you're working with mythology, monsters or monster adjacent creatures are kind of there. And so yeah, I've kind of like been working on that theme for a long time now. And my second graphic novel, Beast of Wolf's Bay, also dealt with essentially adapting Beowulf, but modernizing it as a contemporary Sasquatch story. So I kind of worked with the idea of a monster there too. And then working on the Ghostbusters series allowed me to play around with monsters on that scale too. So generally, I think I incorporate monsters just mostly through myth and folklore.
Great. So this panel concept came out of the idea of the monster as an other, as a metaphor for something that's outside of the normal, out of the conventional, the accepted. And your work is all really different. So I'm curious to know if, when illustrating in this kind of surreal, heightened way, is there something particular about the monster, whether it's the monster within or the monster from mythology or like a pure invention, that kind of unlocks storytelling possibilities for you? If anyone wants to jump in, go ahead. Otherwise, I can point to you.
Maybe we can go in like the order we originally went in.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, with this idea of monster as other, for me in my most recent work, that other was mental illness. And I don't think people would necessarily read that immediately, but for me, a vampire was this perfect, but also kind of romantic capsule for depression, you know, like the nocturnal qualities and other traits that they have. And for me, that just sort of opened up that world in a way that was accessible and friendly. And I think monsters and other monster type figures tend to do that for a lot of authors and artists.
Elisa, do you want to go next?
Okay. Well, this question made me think of a specific work of mine, which was my first graphic novel, Anomalia, which means anomaly in English. And this was about my experience with the earthquake in Chile in 2010 and about living with anxiety. And I used the figure of monster represent chaos and predictability. As an anxious person, I am usually terrified of the unpredictable. And I chose to draw this monster like a kind of dragon. I enjoy drawing like very frequently. I draw these kind of serpents with manes. And in this novel, I think I didn't do it consciously, but I think it was a way of showing how I was trying to befriend the idea of unpredictability, like drawing something that I liked, like this kind of monster. And it appears in only a few panels, but it helped me like conveying that thing I went through.
Mm-hmm. Ines, what about you?
So the question is like how we incorporate monsters in our work?
Yeah, and whether that like unlocked something for you in your storytelling?
Well, I think it's like not necessarily like scary. Like I think like when like monster stuff is like can you put this one that is says AL5? Like I made this one for my book Alienation, that a part is like it's like one of the characters is reading this like hentai like a furry porn comic, and it's like the monster is like a funny thing, you know, it's like disgusting, but it's like funny. And like I feel like the characters that I use like human are more monstrous than like the monsters themselves. Like I feel like the without me being like a monstrous character. Oh yeah. Or what do I do?
Do you want to keep
well,
going,
this
Ines?
image that is on the screen right now is what? Oh, yeah. This image that is on the screen right now is from a series of paintings that I did about like this experience that I had with being psychotic, and after that I like threw myself out of a second floor, so I couldn't move for like a year, like 2 years or so. And I was visited by all this like characters that were like torturing me. So that's what these images are about. So it's like, yeah, there's like a monstrous thing in like the other, but like the other is also like yourself, like you're like your worst enemy. And yeah, that's kind of like what those paintings are about.
And Erik, do you have something to add as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, everyone's saying some really, I think everyone's kind of coming around to the same idea about the other being the unknown or the dark, like shadows in your own soul or your own person. And that's pretty much it. That's how I've always thought of it too. The monster represents something unknowable or something unknown, and something very hidden or secretive or mysterious about its existence. It's not really understandable, and when it reflects that in you as a person, you're sort of coming face to face with your own shadow, your own darkness, I guess. But that's kind of how I've always considered it.
I'm kind of building on what you've all kind of touched this idea that the monster is us. And often monster stories are kind of born out of some sort of cultural sickness. I'm thinking of like The Creature of the Black Lagoon and how that's a commentary on pollution, or Frankenstein's monster is kind of a result of this uncontrolled step forward in science. So I'm interested to hear kind of more about that aspect of the monster as well in your work. Are there kind of cultural themes beyond the personal? Are there cultural themes also that the monster is helping you to explore in whatever form the monster might be?
I guess for me, it kind of goes back to that same idea that because monsters are ostracized, that they represent those things that we can't talk about. But, you know, the great thing about art is that we have the ability to talk about those cultural taboos. And I think people want to talk about them. And then monsters give us like a safe vessel for that. And sometimes in our cultural narratives, we need a villain, and we need to be able to talk about it and observe it and make art and observe art about it. And I think that might be the great role of these larger cultural monsters that you're mentioning.
Mm-hmm. Elisa, how about
Should
you?
I go next? Okay.
Yeah.
One thing I thought about was how monsters question like the beauty standards and appearance standards, because they're not like supposed to look nice or beautiful according to human standards. So they kind of I mean, you have the freedom to give them whatever appearance you want to give them. They can look however you want them to look like. So yeah, I don't know if it's a profound idea, but that's what I thought about.
That makes sense to me. Ines, you're still with us, right?
Yeah, I don't know why I don't have the video anymore, but I'm here.
Okay, well, we can hear you at least.
Yeah, like the perception of the okay, cool. Yeah, the perception of the monster is definitely influenced by the cultural context it's in, because like thinking, for example, of the pre-Hispanic gods in Mexican culture, which were pretty monstrous and like really just like bloodthirsty kind of scary entities, but now we see them like monstrous, but like in the context where they were like experienced, they were not like a monstrous thing. They were like just powerful. And in that same sense, like you can see any other character, like even Trump or whatever, is like a monster, but it's just like some stupid clown. Like it, like you can see anything like a monster or human or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Culturally, I mean, yeah, like if you take the idea of the monster as a dark mirror, then the idea is that it shows the public its own like worst instincts and its own worst traits. That can really be applied to anything. And so like, yeah, like you mentioned Creature from the Black Lagoon, and that how that is sort of like a dark mirror for pollution, serving as a bit of a cautionary tale. And Frankenstein, well, we all know the real monster in Frankenstein is Dr. Frankenstein, and he can kind of represent, you know, he's sort of a dark mirror of parenthood or creation. Like he's made this thing and wants nothing to do with it. He completely abandons it and abandons his own responsibilities. But mythically, like mythologically, especially with Norse mythology, the monsters, the Jotun, the giants and trolls, they represent sort of I think the chaos of nature in the natural world. And so it's sort of like the natural chaos, the natural entropy of the universe. And we humans fight against that by building civilization and kind of keeping them away, sort of at bay with our own like constructed human civilization. So culturally, it probably just relates to whoever is telling the story. When I work with the Norse myths, I try to be as accurate as I can to how I understand them, but I can't shake the fact that there's a contemporary edge that I have. I live now and I'm who I am. And so, they work really well as a with other layers of metaphor, I think, layered on top of them.
We have a question from one of our viewers, and I think it works quite well since we've been talking about monsters as an exploration of what we can't talk about or the taboo. Hans Peralta asks, what do you think of monsters as a vehicle for releasing a certain darkness from ourselves?
Yeah, I think that's completely accurate, is that we have this desire to face our own darkness, but a lot of our societies and cultures make it so difficult because there's a lot of stigma. And then when you put those fears or desires onto something else, whether it's a cultural figure of a monster or it's just a way that, it's your own character, I think that is a way of confronting that darkness and letting it go. And I think that can be a really healthy way to approach things, and it can be a very powerful release. At least it was for me when I worked with the idea of monsters in my work.
Mm-hmm. Ines, how about you?
Yeah, like I said, I don't very consciously or like intentionally work thinking about the idea of monsters, but yeah, I think they're like like you can explore many things, like not necessarily like darkness, or like they can be funny too, like they're just like it's like a cartoon, like it's like an exaggeration of like certain attributes that can make you feel like maybe a little uncomfortable or scared just because they're like weird or not like whatever you consider normal, but they're not necessarily like something bad, but you can use them to explore like darkness too, for sure.
Elisa, how about you?
I was going to ask you to repeat the question. I didn't get it.
Sure.
And Hans Peralta is my friend.
Well, he asks, what do you think of monsters as a vehicle for releasing a certain darkness from ourselves?
Yeah, I think he's right. I mean, what Ines said made sense to me. I don't know if I can add a lot more to what both girls said. But yeah, one of the ideas I had, because it kind of related to one of your questions, Alyssa, was that maybe we like monsters because we see dark, weird, or ugly parts of us reflected on them, even if we repress them.
Yeah, one of the things that I keep coming back to when oh, sorry. Were you finished?
No, yeah.
Yeah, well, Erik, why don't you?
Oh, yeah. I think he's completely right. That's definitely an attraction to monsters, for sure. It's also, I think, as a creator, it can be a way to exercise this idea of people. I don't know, you get to experience something a little bit more dangerous or a little more dark than you might normally experience. It gives you, I think Sarah said this earlier, it gives you sort of like in a way, a safe place to experiment or experience some of these things.
One of the things that I often come back to with monsters is that kind of push and pull where we're repulsed by monsters and they're helping us things that we want to rid ourselves of or face in ourselves, but also they're very appealing. Like Ines said, they can be fun and funny and just a really great way to get a story across. And since this panel is called Monster Love, I also want to talk about the romantic or the erotic appeal that monsters sometimes have. I mean, Sarah Fang's is a love story. Alienation is one of my all-time favorite graphic novels, and it's got this kind of erotic charge to the way the parasite and the main character interact with each other. And then you've got Dracula and mythology, and those are like so steeped in love and control and eroticism and all of those things. So maybe my question ends up being like, what drew you to that, if that was something you were consciously doing, or if you have any kind of further thoughts on the erotic and romantic appeal of monsters.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been touching so much upon the idea that monsters represent the taboo. And one of the great taboos of our time is sexuality. And I think that's why you see monsters get romanticized. And I mean, my work was about vampires, and there's such a long, long history of vampires being used as a romantic character, even though they're very dark and scary. And I think that the metaphor is pretty obvious, right? It's like this creature that comes and bites your neck and you're like, oh no. But in reality, yeah. I don't want this. But in reality, it's just again, it's a safe way to talk about something that might be very hard to say in a literal way. And what's great for me as an artist is that now there's all this lore, and there's this whole world of like untapped romantic potential for story writing. And so when I got to write a love story with a vampire, it was just, I mean, no pun intended, it was like fertile ground for all kinds of like thoughts on love and sexuality and the darker parts of love. And so I think the cross between monsters and sexuality and lust is like one of the great storytelling devices of our time.
Elisa, do you want to go next?
Yeah. What this question made me think about was the fact that there's always some kind of mystery around monsters, and maybe curiosity plays a part on this attraction. Like when you like someone, you like try to understand them, or the mystery element is important in attraction. So I think that's what happens with monsters, maybe. And also the fact that romance is not perfect, and like Sarah said, maybe monsters help you like show the dark side of romance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, aside from what both Elisa and Sarah have said already, like how this like darkness or taboo or whatever can be like appealing, I think also monsters or just like otherworldly creatures are like a way to embody like this like pure like energy that is within us, that like sex is like a raw like animal primitive thing, and by having like monsters or like like by having other kind of non-human characters like embodying that, it's like maybe easier in a way for us to like express that side that we usually keep hidden. And yeah, and like it can be explored in many ways. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be like this darkness, like I said, like it can also be like a funny thing. Like furry porn is like, it's like ridiculous, and it's and it can be really cool. Like there's some just like, I don't know, like it doesn't have to be just like weird shit. Like it's yeah, I feel like there's a lot more to explore with this kind of creatures than just darkness. But there's definitely like something about the hidden, but it doesn't necessarily have to be dark.
Mhm.
Yeah, I sort of think that Ines was just touching on this idea of like the monster is representative of like our primal self, or like our darker motivations, I guess, or our um, less buttoned up uh, instincts. And so there's
Yeah.
something, yeah, right. So there's something very like,
Mhm.
whether it's dark or scary or not, there's something very appealing about connecting with that part of you, or that part of us, I guess. Um, and there's definitely something very like seductive too. Like you were saying romance and or erotic, but I think the idea of like, I think there's just in pretty much every set of folklore that I know of around the world, there's like seductive elements of seduction. Like people are getting lured into this um, lured into this underworld by some being of some sort, whether that's a I don't know, whether it's some kind of demon or mermaid or like vampire or what have you. Like it's pretty much across the board. Um, so there's that too.
Mhm. Yeah. And if we've got any other viewers who have questions, feel free to ask. I'll incorporate them as we go along. But in the meantime, speaking of the appeal of monsters, have there been any from any genre, any medium, that really stuck with you, either from your childhood or more recently, but they really made an impact?
I think for me, like on the theme of vampires, the first one I will reference is Lestat from the interview with the vampire series from Anne Rice, just because I think that's such like that character kind of created a trope in a way of this very dark, very seductive, sexy vampire boy. And even though that's kind of silly, what I will say about Anne Rice's writing is it's super beautiful and macabre, and that aesthetic sense always stuck with me a little bit. And for her, like her world building has kind of found its way into my world building. So I would say Lestat and Anne Rice's vampires definitely made a huge impact on me.
Mm-hmm. Me too. Elisa, how about you?
Yeah, in my case, I already named them already, but I don't know if they count as monsters, but I thought of dragons. Like sometimes they're monsters, sometimes they're not. But they keep showing up in my drawings. I don't really think about it too much, but I really like drawing dragons. And the other kind of monster I thought of was zombies. Like I haven't included them in my work, but I love zombie stories. Like I enjoy how they become part of the landscape and the monsters. In most zombie stories, the monsters are the humans, like the bad ones, like the humans that go against each other, and zombies are like secondary. That's something I like about those stories.
Mm-hmm. Ines, what about you?
Yeah, I like stories like that too, where the humans are like the real monsters, or like they show their monster side. I wasn't really into horror stuff like as a kid very much. Like I got into it later, but I think one of my favorite, like the most impacted me, was like reading Lovecraft, and And yeah, I've heard some people say like that's like a cheap trick that he uses, but I think it's like it's a really smart way to like describe horror, that it's just talking about things that are undescribable, and there really isn't anything scarier than like the unknown and the absurd and like the chaos of like what is beyond. And I think that's something that really like inspired me to explore like horror in that sense of like not something that it's really material like defined thing, but like something that is precisely undefinable. And that's like a monster that's a monster in a sense that is always like haunting you.
I don't know if I have any particular monsters that have stuck with me, but as a kid, I was kind of anything macabre or grotesque I sort of latched onto. I was not a horror movie kid, though. But I will say that that the original Ghostbusters film came out. I was a big fan from the beginning, and I kind of followed the
Hell yeah, me too.
like Tim Burton movies too, in the 80s and going into the 90s. But with Ghostbusters, yeah, I don't know. I think that owes a lot to Lovecraft as well, and like really connected me with this idea of the paranormal, and I think kind of set me on a little path where I became a little bit of a paranormal. Like I would kind of go to the occult section in the bookstore and read all the ghost hunting books and stuff. But nothing, I guess nothing specific. I wish I could say like the Vampire Lestat, but I don't think I can.
You reminded me of Gremlins.
Oh, yes.
Those were really cool monsters.
Yeah.
I can't hear it.
Yeah, we've lost the audio.
Oh,
I'm not
okay.
saying anything.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, just speaking of like another kind of 80s puppet movie, I was thinking Labyrinth also was weirdly formative for me, both like the freaky Jim Henson puppets, but also just like David Bowie as the the Goblin King. But actually, as I was kind of thinking through what my answer to this question was as well, just as like a kind of non-human that shows us another way of being that isn't necessarily dark, subconsciously, I must have chosen to put the Moomin right there, because it is kind of I mean, monstrous is maybe a strong word, but a non-human being that exists in the world in a different way, and maybe an aspirational way. So, you know, it all makes sense. It's all coming back to the questions, which makes sense because I wrote them. But yeah, so one of the things that, just kind of thinking of all four of you being on this panel, I thought of was that there's such a huge variety of genre that you're all working with. And so we've got kind of like a romantic comedy, sci-fi, dystopia, mystery, thriller, mythology, autobiography, literary adaptation. Like there's a huge, huge range. So I just kind of building on the conversation we've been having, is there something about kind of the figure of the monster, and it can be, you know, a very flexible term, as we've talked about, that is also flexible across genre?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just this very blank slate where it can be what you need it to be. I think something that comes to mind is that we've been talking a lot about like internal darkness and taboos and stuff, but then somebody said monsters can also be cute, and I was like, yeah, we can use them to talk about other things as well, like simple things like social awkwardness. And that just kind of makes me think that there's a beauty to this trope and this character where it can be what you need to be.
Mm-hmm.
I connect this idea with the fact that there's always some part that is human in monsters, and that had to do with one of the other questions. But humans are so diverse that monsters can be the same. I mean, they're just as diverse as humanity. So you can fit them in any story depending on the personality you give them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add.
That's fine.
Well,
I mean, yeah.
So monsters can kind of represent any conflict too. They can be anything. Maybe it's not even conflict, but they kind of exist in a way to tempt us or lead us down the wrong path, or a path, I should say. So they can kind of be, like they're flexible. They can kind of be whatever you need them to be. If you need them to be a metaphor for pollution, or if you need them to be, a shadow self to confront, like your inner, the evil that's inside you, or like the path not taken, like all of that works. So yeah, can really drive a plot.
I guess my last question then, before we kind of start the wrap-up process, is do you think you'll continue on with monsters, be they, vampires or gods or dragons or parasites or hybrids and all sorts of things? Do you think you'll continue on with that with your work going forward?
Definitely. I'm actually in the very final stages of completing my next book, which is called Cryptid Club. And it's all about cryptids. And I sort of mentioned earlier that maybe the taboo is not so dark and it's just social awkwardness. So I had this idea that, like, you never see Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and Mothman. And, like, maybe that's just because they're super shy and socially awkward. So the book is basically just an exploration of friendship between some very socially inept creatures. And I guess, this panel has kind of helped me understand that the cryptid element is just a really great way to write about social awkwardness, but also like the friendships and the acceptance that you can find in other people like you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in my case, I have a long way to go to finish my Dracula adaptation. I only drew the first month of the story. It's a story that happens like in 7 months. It's an epistolary novel, so it's got dates and all. And I've only adapted the first month, and I'm gonna keep publishing next month, the second month of the story. So yeah, and I don't think I'm gonna finish it this year or the next one. So you can keep an eye to that project. And I'm gonna keep drawing monsters always because they're really fun to draw.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna keep drawing whatever y'all people call monsters forever. Like, they're fun to draw. And I'm planning my next comic to be about this girl that is like a truck driver, and someone puts a roofie on her, and then she's gonna crash, and the truck is like transforms into like a transformer, and then they realize they're like in love with each other and they fuck. So that's gonna be my next comic.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay with it for sure. I found that mythic fiction is kind of my wheelhouse, and so whatever I keep doing, I think it's going to more or less fall in that genre, and I've got a graphic novel I'm kind of finishing up at the moment. I have no idea if it'll be out in 2021 or 2022 because it's not quite that level of finished yet. So we'll see. But that's more of the same mythology adaptational stuff.
Mm-hmm. So we actually have another audience question. Caroville asks, "What about sci-fi monsters?"
I love sci-fi as a genre. I think above all other genres. Like, I think especially for movies, I think like intelligent sci-fi is some of the smartest way to talk about what's happening in the world currently that exists. And I guess I'll cite Arrival, the movie, which was, in my opinion, a brilliant way to talk about communication and decision making in a way that just hit you even harder because of this beautiful story around it. So for me, sci-fi really has the potential to reach some of those true depths because it brings existential questions into the fold as well. And you bring these larger questions about the universe and aliens and what we're doing into our very mundane search for meaning. And so for me, I'm glad the question was asked because for me, sci-fi really is like my favorite genre above all, even though I haven't really worked in it. But I think of all the genres, it just has so much potential to move and affect people. So thumbs up for sci-fi.
Yeah, it's my favorite genre too. It's weird. I think I haven't done anything sci-fi because robots are hard to draw. Like technology is hard to draw, so I'd have to learn to do that. But I was also thinking now that we usually relate monsters to creatures like that are more natural than machines, and machines can be really monsters as well, depending on the story. Like, I don't know, Matrix, like the Matrix, those are definitely monsters even if they're machines. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think monsters don't have to be like, or I mean, sci-fi doesn't have to have robots. Like, you can draw like a human and it's just an android or whatever. Like sci-fi it could be anything. You just say it's in the future and like it's sci-fi. Like it's like, yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that comic it was also like a lot of work that wasn't fun, but thinking of how you can visualize like the stuff of the future can be like virtual reality, which is like anything. So like that's what I did with my alienation book, was a little about that, like drawing just cool stuff that I'm like, oh, this could just happen like in the virtual reality. And then there's like the scary part too, which is like the I mean, I don't want to tell the book, but you can read it. But
we'll have to wait and read it.
Don't spoil it.
Yeah, but like sci-fi has a lot of space for all kinds of evil or monsters or just like uncomfortable things, like from like the movie Alien. Like that one's also a really, really great movie, and it's like a sci-fi with a monster that is like really recognizable. But you could also have a sci-fi with a monster that is like undefinable, which is kind of what I try to do with my book, like an artificial intelligence kind of entity that is tries to take over, but not really, like just wants to, like have a consciousness, because artificial intelligence has no conscience. It's just like a replication of information processing, and like living animals and humans have consciousness. So it's like, what would happen if the artificial intelligence wanted that and could have it?
I have a warm, soft place in my heart, I guess, for mid 20th century science fiction. There's just something about the way the stories are told, I guess, is where the subtext isn't quite so sub, and like I just really enjoy the way it serves as cultural commentary. Usually, because of the lack of budget, you have to go a lot heavier on the cultural commentary or something like that. So yeah, I agree. The monsters in science. I mean, Frankenstein is the first science fiction novel, so I think they pretty much serve the same role as they would in horror or fantasy or mythology or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually have an upcoming book for the 33 and a Third series. They're like little books about music. And I wrote one about Janelle Monáe, the singer, and her first album, which is a sci-fi concept album. So
Cool.
I read about it and I got so excited because that's my favorite album by her. I want to read your book.
Thank you. I've spent the last 2 years listening to it and I'm not tired of it yet. So
it's so good.
Yeah, but I think sci-fi is always going to be something that I go back to again and again. So thank you for that question. So yeah, unless anyone wants to jump in with like a last thought that just came to them, I will start wrapping up this amazing panel that I really enjoyed. I'd like to thank you, all four of you, for coming. Can you actually just let us know how you can be contacted, your social medias? Oh, there we go. They're right there.
Yes, right there.
Screenshot.
So perfect. So I encourage you to.
I want to say hi to my
out...
friend.
Go for it. Yeah.
Sorry. Un saludo, Carito. Gracias por la pregunta. I'm back on the video. Whoa, just to say bye. Goodbye,
everyone. Oh, I still can't see you, unfortunately.
Okay.
All right, we've got her on the Zoom chat.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Ines. But yeah, so thank you all for coming, to all our viewers for coming. I invite you to go follow and like and subscribe and do all of the things to these amazing artists. Don't miss our next show. I'll actually be back here in just a few minutes to have a conversation with Cyan Rose, the author of Our Work is Everywhere. I think it'll be a really great conversation. And thank you again to our sponsor, Pro Chile, and to FBDM for hosting amazing conversations and amazing opportunities for artists to talk and share their work. So I'm Elisa Favreau. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Or stick around and listen to the next conversation.